Good morning, everybody. Welcome to a Taurus podcast. We're here today to talk about Save the Seed. I'm Curtis Russell. I live out in Cateppo Lake, just northeast of Regina in the Capel Valley. We're wrapping up harvest here, and everybody's doing a great job knocking the crop off as quick as they can. And would I ask everybody else here to just give a little blurb on yourself? Mike, do you want to start first?
Sure. I'm Mike Dolinski. I live in Edmonton, Alberta, and I'm contracted with Taurus Ag to look at research and training on behalf of Taurus Ag. I've got a long background with Alberta agriculture, and then 15 years with Agritrend Agrology as senior coach, and now 2 years with Taurus. For many of you will know of me, so I won't go any more about tell you any more about me. Roddy?
Thanks, Mike. I'm Roddy McNinch. I'm from Pinoca, Alberta. I've been with Taurus, as a number of different roles for the last almost 8 years now. As far as the harvest in Alberta, I think you guys are a little further ahead of us, Curtis. I don't know. We got some peas off, but we're still hoping to get the combines moving a little more regular out here in central northern Alberta. So it's a little cool and wet out there today. So it's we'll see if it doesn't get a little better for us. But yeah, that's me, and happy to be here.
Well, and I guess I should have gave a little history about myself too. So I worked with Vigor for 15 years before I came coming to Taurus. So today's whole topic about Save the Seed, you can call it lucky or not, I guess, but I've seen every type of scenario you could imagine of why a canola seed, didn't make it to the surface, or frankly, the practices that may have helped or hurt that situation. Spend more time looking at the bad than the good, but of course you've seen a lot of really good ones too. So today, if this is your first time on a Taurus podcast or webinar, we're very informal. You're going to see we're not TV personalities. We're all doing our best here, struggling through this. I really, really hope that there's lots of questions. Submit them in the comment box on the side at any time. We'll try to get to all of them. And if for some reason there's too many to get to, someone will reach out and get you your answers. So also, if you would like at the end, we're pretty easy to find. This is, if you have something you'd like to ask us after the podcast, reach out, have a conversation. Mike, myself, and Roddy all enjoy digging in a little deeper and getting into the specifics of every farm or retail or really any agronomic idea. So to give you a little bit of the format, we have we didn't expect a question right away. So what we'll do is we'll give Mike a first question. And this is really all we want to do, is just questions and discussion. So Mike, what does the optimum plant look like?
Well, there you go. But before I get going, I see, looking at the list of folks that are on here, that some of Redfern's guys are here, and just for historical purpose, I graduated with Ray in '69 and saw him last year at a reunion, 50th year reunion. Some of the Agritrend guys are on, 406 out of Montana. So welcome to all you folks that are here. So what does an optimal plant look like? Well, I'm going to only talk largely about wheat and canola. The other plants are sort of more specialized if you're looking at pulses. And for me, it's fairly easy, and people always ask that, what does an optimal plant or plant stand look like? And let's look at wheat. I just took these on Saturday, and you can see that for me, looking at wheat, I'm looking at a plant that is probably a primary head and one tiller. This is too low a seeding rate. To get this seeding rate, you're going to need about 50 plants per square foot. This seeding rate, you're going to be looking at about 28 to 32 to 34 plants per square foot. And with this one here, you're looking at probably only 25 or so plants per square foot to get that extra tiller. So for me, I'm always telling folks that when I'm looking for my optimal plant, and the varieties change. Viewfield is a short, stubby little plant, and some are taller, so that varies a lot. but generally we're wanting 2 heads per plant, a primary head and a first tiller. And there are a lot of reasons for that. Number one is the third tiller generally doesn't make it, or if it does make it, it's kind of rare. So somewhere between 2 and 3 plants per square foot, depending on your spacing rates. And that's going to give you close to what you're going to get for optimal production as well. You're looking at about 550 to 600 heads per square meter, square yard for reasonable plant productivity. And you're going to get nutrients up into that plant. So we'll just leave it at that. And I always tell guys, you know, when they're looking at trying to figure out, have they seeded at the right rate? The general rule of thumb historically has been, guys, overseed canola and underseed cereals. And I'm not sure that that is specifically the problem, but usually the issue from a historical point of view is that the mortality rate in cereals, a lot of folks call it 5%, 6%. Generally, we find it's actually more in the 10, 15% mortality, and I think that's part of the problem with some of the seeding rates on wheat. Now, in canola, I've been looking at this a bit because now that we're moving into you know, a specific number of seeds per 1,000 kernel weight in some of the products in the market, and we're looking at getting our seeding rates down to, or our plant stands down to 5 or 6, 7 plants per square meter, that changes the structure of the plant. And what I like to see is a plant like this. Some of the best yields I've seen recently are plants like this, where we're getting shoots that are starting out right at the base of the plant and a root the size of almost your thumb. We get thick stems and a lot of branching. You can see the size of this root. It's not a large picture, but the size of that root is huge, and we get all these shoots low. The only way you're going to get that is if you get down to those plant numbers of 5, 6, 7 per square meter. This spring, we had really good moisture here in Alberta and a lot across the prairies, and I think every seed made it. And what I'm seeing out there are a lot of spindly plants, 12, 15 plants per square foot, and they're leaning over, and there are no side shoots to speak of. And I'm seeing a whole lot of those because the plant density is just too thick. So I'm looking at these, and I think we're going to find out that we're soon going to be able to relate, if we can get our seeding rates down to this, or our plant stand down to this, we're going to see huge increases in stem size. And I think we'll find over time that we'll be able to relate yields to stem size in our canolas. So those are sort of what I think are the kinds of plants we're looking at. And the only way you're going to know that is if you actually do plant counts along throughout the season. And guys will talk about that from now on. But that's a starting place for me.
Yeah, I think it's no different than soil sampling or tissue testing. You just got to start, and you got to see what you have. A lot of growers that I've talked to, and they go and they start counting, they're pretty close. You know, most people can walk through a field and, you know, eyeball that this is a pretty nice stand. You know, that's too many, this is too thin. But when you start counting and actually throwing something, you know, don't walk up and pick that row, because if you're a positive person, you'll pick the good part. If you're a negative person, you'll pick the bad part. You know, do some random counts, write them down. And once you start to do that, you'll start to understand what questions you need to ask, what information you need at seeding, what you need to record at seeding to help you with that counting later. It's all just learning and trying to understand what happened. And Mike's comment about Alberta being wet and more plants, there's a perfect example of where a grower may not adjust anything going into next spring if you're drier in Alberta, because the likelihood of that being there again is slim. So trying to understand what caused those high plant is as important as counting. Don't just count and then adjust. Understand, well, is it going to do that again based on those factors?
Well, you know, we went back, you know, I've been around long enough that, you know, in the early 70s and so on, we were seeding at 5 pounds per acre, and we would have seedling mortality that was 50, 60% due to diseases, flea beetles, all kinds of things. You know, we've got hybrids now. We've got, you know, minimum tillage situations where the seed bed is a lot better. We've got better moisture. And I think we're still trying to get over those risks that we faced way back when with those spindly little plants. We had root maggots here in Alberta, and we can see them all across the prairies. You know, we now got these hybrids, and these hybrids are racehorses, and if we feed them properly, they can fill a lot of space. Whereas wheat, you don't have that option. Wheat, you just need number of. I frequently find with wheat, and why we got the issue with wheat production, is that there's too much space between rows. It's not capturing enough sunlight, so we got to get those plant densities up. But one thing I want to mention for guys that are out in the field right now, and I'm glad we have this webinar going on now, or this podcast now, you know, there's a lot of straight cutting on. When you see that yield monitor just go sky high, just stop your combine, get out and take a look at the stems that are out in your field. And that'll give you a good idea on what your plant density is there. You can do this kind of stuff right now if you're out in the field combining and get a handle on what's going on in your best land. And we know variability is a killer for us. So where you see that big yield monitor going sky high, take a look. Where it's sort of normal, take a look. And where it's poor, take a look at what plant stand you had there. Give you a good clue on what you're looking for next year. It's a matter of getting there, though.
That's a great point, Mike. I think you kind of stole my thunder there. But if anything, I think a lot of the guys that are listening to this podcast are probably going to be in the combine. They're going to be listening to this as they're taking the crop off. And I mean, if anything, I think that's a perfect time to be planning for next year. I mean, you look at where the yield monitor spikes, you get out, have a look, but also have a look at where that yield monitor drops to nothing, or where you really notice some problem spots. And I mean, a lot of growers know their fields. They might know, okay, this should be decent, but I got a real problem spot here. I mean, get out and look there too. Is that related to seeding density? Is it related to too much moisture, as in the case of a lot of places in Alberta this year? I mean, I think a lot of people underestimate the amount of agronomic work they can do in the combine, and that's maybe something we should pay attention to, or pay a little more attention to going into this fall.
Well, and you know, we've got customers using climate and other programs where they're dropping pins for rocks that they almost put through the combine. So drop a pin and or do it on Google. You know, I drop pins all the time. I don't have any fancy farming program. I just use Google Maps. You can save it, you can name it, you can do whatever you need to do, and just say, great spot. You don't even have to stop the combine. And then that'll allow you to go back, and if you drop a bunch of pins throughout, even if you picked one field, one of your more variable fields, we're talking about seed survivability, but looking at what's good and what's bad can give you a great picture. When I would go do a product inquiry with a grower, or we're trying to figure out, most of them were friends that they just brought you out there to have a look. The first question I would ask is there somewhere in this field that's good? And then we'd go look at that. Why did it work here and not here? And I think as a growologist, when you're ripping around on your quad and you see something that's different, drop a pin, have a discussion, and do it in the wintertime. A lot of times we think, oh, well, I'll remember that. How could I possibly forget that? And then you'll look at that pin on your phone and go, what was this about? Because, you didn't write down and take some good notes. So have a little book in the combine, or as an agrologist, take good notes. And that's what provides value. Growers are busy, and sometimes they just want to have a conversation when they have time. And if you're prepared to have a good discussion, that's great for everybody involved. So
just maybe one last thing before we maybe move on to seed is, let me suggest that when you're doing this with your combine, because you got yield monitors and you got maps that are going to show up here, if you stop, though, you can really learn a lot by just looking at the plants and the stems that are there. And I just suggest this, or you're thinking about, if you're benchmark sampling, for example, and you're maybe even doing some zonation in your fields, well, then stop there. Do your tissue tests at your benchmarks, and that way you'll get a handle on how that crop is producing relative to the fertility package you have there in your soil tests. And after a number of years, when you go through your rotations, you'll get a feel for how different crops respond to those fertility packages. And if you guys are measuring moisture, well, then you can tie all that together, and then you're over time for, say, younger farmers who are just getting going, consider that in terms of your plans for moving forward in the future. Because, you know, we do a lot of interesting things. We soil test, we tissue test, we grow that seed, and we check for protein. I'm going to show you some stuff about looking at nutrient density in seed, because that to me is the ultimate answer to what the plants really needed in the crop, and maybe what they're missing when we look at the seed viability and seed quality going forward. So it starts here in the fall time. The plants that are going to be the seeds for next year have to be properly fed in order to make that seed as good as absolutely possible.
Well, Mike, why don't we go into that right now? Because I think when we get into factors that affect survivability, there's a good chance we're going to go on a bit of a rant. So I think this is very interesting and unique and different. And some of these factors, of course, will be obvious to others where there's some of this information.
There. Just for you guys here, because I'm a proponent that the seed is important, and taking a look at which is the best seed. I mean, who asked that question? And I do most of my work on wheat, because, but the same thing applies to canola. If we look at a primary head and a tiller, you can see that when the head is setting up seed, the middle of the head is the first part of the head that pollinates and gets access to the nutrient of greatest quantity in that plant. So you get 4 seeds. You know, these 2 seeds will always be the biggest, and they'll be equal. This will be a bit smaller, and this will be the smallest. And you can see it starts right here, because these 2 seeds, which were pollinated first, and you can see the anther still there, had access to the most nutrient in that plant. The same thing holds true with canola. Where are the biggest pods? On the bottom of the plant. They're pollinated first. The plant has the most nutrient built up in its system to feed that seed. So with canola, there doesn't seem to be as much variability in terms of vigor and the seed size, but with wheat, because there are some changes taking place in terms of the being able to keep and call seed by variety, and you guys should check into that. I would be saying I don't want any of these seeds from the tiller. I'd like to get these 3 seeds. You know, probably 60% of the total production from that plant is what I'd go after. And you know, if you're keeping your own seeds, say a lot of guys will buy a variety and then they'll keep it for 1 or 2 years until they change. You know what? Pick your seed field next year. Treat it. Maybe make it your best one. Treat it really well. Look after fungicides and nutrition. And then when you go to clean it, put it on a gravity machine, select these 3 big dense seeds out, and you got an easy way to improve your quality. Canola is the same way in a large sense. The big seeds are usually on the bottom of the pod. And we really got hurt badly by that 2 weeks of hot weather we got late this fall. A lot of those top seeds didn't make it. Plants ran out of water. So when we're seeding, where we have the big advance is to seed by, as we call it, 1,000 seed weight, because if you don't start there, you don't even know how many plants you should have per square meter. And then you have the quality of the seed is the next thing. What's your seeding rate? What's the quality? And then what's your mortality going to be? But these seeds all have to be nutrient dense in order to provide a really good product for putting into the ground. Because your yield, your maximum yield potential occurs when you put the seed in the ground. And if your seed is poor quality, your yield potential is down before you even get going. That's just my rant about, you know, I'm a big lover of seeds, and I see we got at least 1 seed company that's involved in this, and I'm interested in nutrient density for sure going forward. You guys want to make some comments from your experience about, you know, canola or lentils or anything else?
I think there's when it comes to nutrient density, like you said, that when it comes to wheat, the kernels at the center of the head is what's getting the most. On canola, it's the bottom of the plant that's getting the most nutrient density. I mean, we're seeing a lot more work in that nutrient density in relation to into 1,000 kernel weight, into germination, into vigor, into trying to create a better seed to produce next year's crop. So, I mean, I'm interested to see where it goes in the next 5 to 10 years. Like I look at this and I love the conversation, Mike, but you talked about a gravity machine. I mean, I'm curious if we're going to be able to handpick those first 4, those first 8, or those first 12 kernels out of the center of a head of wheat to seed for next year's crop going forward. Is that 3 years down the road? Is that 5 years down the road? 10 years? I don't know. But I mean, we've been doing it for centuries. I mean, we want to take our best seed and use it to produce next year's crop. I mean, that's the way human nature is, and I find it interesting as we get into this technology, what the potential could be in the years to come.
Well, I think.
Go ahead, Curtis.
I think it has to start with measuring it and showing the results of measuring it. I think there's a lot of seed growers out there that would spend that extra $25 an acre to increase seed nutrition if there was a market for it. As a grower, if you're just willing to buy seed, or as a retail, that's not important, and there's no correlation to nutrition and vigor. What's the incentive to spend that extra that may not affect yield? It might just go into seed nutrition. So, I think it'll be interesting, Mike, for us to play a little bit with this and to see if we can correlate it, measure it, and then that will create demand. I think most seed growers, well, the ones I know anyway, their whole goal is to produce high vigor, high germination seed. And they're also in it to make money. So the most they can do and I know ones that are doing it right now, even though their customer's not demanding it, they just want to do it to make sure that they're providing the best seed to their customer and for themselves. Obviously they're growing seed for themselves as well. So
it's on the wheat side, it's been controversial for years about seed size and so on and quality. And the fact of the matter is we haven't looked at nutrient density in any serious way. I'm going to show you, I guess, if you like the next slide, where we actually have been working with 2020 Seed Labs and looking at nutrient density. Go to number 7, just and we've been looking at nutrient density, and the fact of the matter is we don't really know what nutrients are key to vigor. The next one. I don't need that one. Next one. There we go. It's coming. We really don't know what nutrients. Just keep rolling it. I think it's got multiple layers in it for some reason. Keep going until it. Next one. There. And one more. And one more. I thought it was just a single slide. There it is. Okay, let's take a look at this, for example. Let me turn this up a bit. So these are the typical new. Oh, we bounced.
Sorry, there's a lag, so you've got all bunch of animation in here.
We're going to take a look at, these are seed samples we've done here, and you can see we've got wheat 1 and 2, barley 1 and 2, and peas 1 and 2. And we're just taking a look at the vigor, because last year we had some problems. We had relatively good germination and poor vigor in some particular cases. So, we don't know, but take a look at this. I'm not sure why. There we go. If you take a look at, for example, manganese, and we've got a vigor of 85, we've got a high level of manganese where the vigor is low. It's much lower. In barley, about the same. And here we have in peas, we have manganese being high where we've got good vigor. If we look at phosphorus, the same kind of thing where we've got vigor of 85%, we've got good germination. We've got really low phosphorus where the vigor is poor. In barley, it's not seemingly important, although that's still a significant difference. And take a look at peas. Phosphorus is really important. Zinc is the other one that we've known for a long time is key because zinc is involved in every enzyme activity. So when the seed is germinating in imbibe waters, it's zinc that's really key to the enzyme activity. And take a look at wheat here, 44 parts per million and 30. The vigor is much higher. We've got higher zinc, and we've seen this in Ontario work and so on over the years. Here we have zinc that's sort of equivalent. So until we get enough seeds over a number of years and we're looking at this nutrient density and which nutrients are key to vigor and germination, we're not going to have an answer. We do know, for example, is zinc and phosphorus are key, and that's why almost all the seed primers that are in the market contain phosphorus and zinc. You know, so we know a certain amount of that, but the reality is nobody's measuring what the nutrient density is in seeds. So we're not going to get anywhere on this particular picture until we do that. And I know our work has just started with 2020, and I know Sarah over there is very interested in this, and I suspect many seed growers would be over time if we can figure it out. But right now, I don't think anybody's looking at it. But we got some good clues last year.
I think that's why you hear, you know, when I came to Taurus and you start talking to the growers that are using our primer or another kind, some just absolutely swear by it because they've seen significant responses, which of course we all know significant responses with any seed treatment is tough to see. So to see one is incredible. And I think why some of them are so sold on it is, you know, maybe that year they had a poor seed with low nutrition and it created such a significant response because the plant really needed it. I think there's a lot here that I want to dig into and understand. And then there's one thing to prove that it works. And then can we manipulate that? Can we make that happen consistently? I think we have to try. I think we live in an environment where seed mortality is going to be variable year over year, even with all other things constant. So the most we can do to take that swing out when we start, having a good plan and kind of doing the best that we can, that'll give us a fighting chance against Mother Nature when she throws these, you know, annual curveballs, I guess would be it's not just sometimes, it's every single year. Something's different. Something's either for us or against us. And how do we try to eliminate the size of that swing?
Well, you know, all of these numbers are based on last year's crop when you're going to seed it. So that's why it's important right now for guys to check what's going on in the combine, because this implicates the nutrition of the mother plant. So if the mother plant has poor access to phosphorus or zinc, there's a good chance it will not have a high zinc or phosphorus level. Those are just two nutrients that I'm going to be talking about. I think manganese is the other one. Look at manganese differences here where we got poor and good vigor. So we know on a global basis that zinc deficiency in much of the developed world is really a problem, and that is why we've got massive work going on in terms of upping the zinc levels in cereals. And you can even see here, we know that peas, for example, use a lot more zinc in the uptake than cereals. So peas have a better capability of securing those nutrients. So we got variability within plants to secure nutrients, and we've got variability across the landscape. So as a result, something in one year will work, something with this crop will work, and the next year it doesn't work. We're not even considering those kind of factors in terms of what's going on with our seed right at the moment and why we get responses and don't get responses and how it varies from crop to crop. Seems like barley, which is a very sort of, for lack of a better term, not a great nutrient user as far as I'm concerned. Barley may not be influenced. It's got a very small gene pool, to tell you the honest truth, and it may not be influenced nearly as much as some other crops which have a much greater gene pool in terms of their capabilities to secure these nutrients and put them into the seed, because we got to put it into the seed if we want better seed.
I think I'll just challenge anybody out there, if you got a question, we are going to do our best to end on time today. So we're down to about 15 minutes left. So if you have a question you'd like us to direct, please do. I'm just going to bring up the factors. We've got one slide just to really challenge. It's nice to see it all in one spot sometimes. Factors that affect yield, which inevitably, they affect the plant completely, right? So for me, I absolutely love this slide. I think every agrologist farmer should sit down with this once a year with a black marker and a highlighter and go through it and just talk about, how each single one, some of them, of course, you can't affect hail. That's one you can stroke out with the black marker, but there's a lot of other ones, and which ones do we think hurt us this year, and which ones do we think can hurt us next year? If you're in areas of Saskatchewan that are very, very dry, of course, soil moisture is going to be a concern unless we get a bunch of rain. Then that will be not a problem. So this year going in, we had a lot of rainfall, so most growers in my neck of the woods were more concerned about it being too wet. And then, of course, we had great seeding, and we would have liked in the end to get more rain than we did. So when you're looking at, really, we talked about TSW here. Really, in canola, we're looking at that 5 to 7 plants. I think that number's 5 to 7 to really help mitigate some of the unknowns. I think if we could do it all by hand and we wouldn't have to worry about flea beetles or frost, I think we'd probably move that number down a little bit. But those are factors we have to consider. When you do your TSW or survivability calculation on any crop, it's what survived. It's what made a plant to yield. So you don't actually do those counts right after seeding. Actually, BASF recommends waiting until after your first application of herbicide. So if there's any volunteers or anything in there, that those are removed. So, but even then isn't the right time to do your final count. Your count is at harvest time. What made a head? What made a plant? What made pods? And it's really important to go look right after seeding, because that will tell you some of the decisions that you made regarding seeding and how that affected your plant. But in all reality, you want to count the stalks that made it. So again, when you're at those stages, when you're out in spring, please take good notes, because and mark those spots that you counted, so you can go back to those same spots and start to learn how many made it and how many didn't. You're going to find that when you have a heavy plant stand, less make it. And when you have a very thin plant stand, of course, most of them have a chance to survive and thrive and go for it. So I had seen in my career 2 plants per square foot. That is not very pretty, and there is a lot of open area that does not have 2. That's the negative of that. But make a crop that surprised everybody. And then, of course, I've seen the inverse, where every seed, literally almost every seed grew, and it's launched and too thin and full of disease. And there really is both sides of the spectrum and trying to hit that center point.
So what is the optimum plant stand, Curtis?
Well, over canola, I would target the 5 to 7. I think we all know that even canola seeded early in the spring is going to get more beat up by flea beetles and frost. So I think what we're going to see is growers understand the mortality and do more counts. We may see seeding rates dial down based on the seeding conditions and when it's going in the ground. Canola seeded in my area on May 1st or May 2nd, which is not unheard of, obviously is at much greater risk to flea beetles and frost than when we have a later season and it's May 20th when it's going in the ground, or May 30th. So I also think the seed treatment that you have, all seed treatments, unfortunately, at this point, or I guess there is a new one, But the ones that we're all comfortable with, the flea beetle does have to bite it and to die. So you got to watch it all. But certain ones do have greater activity than others, and I think if you're implementing that strategy early on, maybe you can play with that a little bit. I grew up in an industry where a bunch of people that didn't sell the seed made recommendations on what to seed, and then I dealt with the repercussions of that. So I guess what I would say is do your counts and do it for your own farm. Everybody's farm is different. North of Indian Head clay, crusting is something that's real. You go south, or south Indian Head, that's less clay. It's just not the same. So even in my little neck of the woods, your recommendation from one farm to the next when a grower asks you is significant. It can be significantly different. Even farmers that farm on both sides will treat those farms differently. And I think we'll get there. I think as we become more comfortable, I think canola is also pretty forgiving. So if you get it wrong, you can still grow that beautiful canola crop. It's a great crop to learn on because unlike, soybeans or corn or, even peas, it's going to cover up if you make a bit of a mistake. So.
Yeah, canola behaves like a weed. It's a great crop. It was a boon to the prairies for sure. I just make one comment. Over all those years with AgroTrend, we found that one of the biggest issues that perennially popped up was really poor seeding. Too fast, no soil contact, packing was poor. Guys had so much straw on top that basically the seeds weren't being covered with any soil. And just for guys to think about, well, if they're in their combines or trucking or whatever, when you make that seed furrow in the ground and you don't cover that seed, that dries out and moisture will move by diffusion from wet to dry. So you have to have something holding that, or else you're not going to get any retention of that moisture. And when we're seeding canola at 3/4, and I see that we have maybe moved a little bit in terms of seeding depth with canola to get it in a little bit deeper than we used to, so we can get that seed germinating. And canola germinates with just about almost no water, so you shouldn't have a problem. But think of it this way. We have flea beetle problems, and me being an entomologist, that's sort of close to my heart. But if we could get our seed to germinate very, very uniformly in a matter of a couple of days, we would solve a lot of our problem just by dilution. In other words, if what happens is we get such variability in emergence that the flea beetles jump on the plants and they eat them down, and then the next day a few more emerge and they eat them down. If we got them all emerging over a very short term, we would have that problem solved. Then I know, everybody's in a rush and everybody's going, and we depend on our chemicals to do that, but we have to take some agronomic considerations in terms of what we're doing at seeding and really consider it more carefully than we do. And the rush is there. I know it's a serious problem, but that is one of our big issues year in and year out.
Well, and it's easy to throw the kitchen sink and switch your whole farm to a certain insecticide in order to give it the best. But there are, if you know that generally it's your early seeded canola, maybe it's half, maybe it's 25% that gets, dinged up by flea beetles. Maybe that's the stuff you treat, and you really keep a close eye on some of the others. My recommendation was always to look at your farm instead of the broad brush. If some of those decisions are logistically a headache and it doesn't make sense, but some of them aren't a headache. It's just to remember to do them and to get it implicated. So, I guess ask lots of questions to your neighbors and to agronomists. How are other people attacking this problem? You might find that doesn't work for your farm, but at least you've considered it and talked about it, right? So, but it's your farm. Do whatever you like. That's the whole point of why you work for yourself.
So, guys, we're gonna we're gonna run out of time here, but I noticed there's some questions coming in, and I just want to touch on some of them real quick. For Randy and Norm, it's 5 to 7 plants per square foot on canola. that is correct. I don't know if there was a square meter, but if it was square, if someone did say a square meter, that was a misspeak. It was a square foot for for Andy and Norm. Candace says, so what is the optimal plant stand for wheat? How does it differ for classes between hard red, CPS, soft white? I mean, that's a great question. And I mean, this is something that will be argued nonstop. But if I'm pulling out optimal plant stand for wheat, barley, canola, oats, peas, lentils, whatever you name it, I would say optimal plant stand of wheat is between 30 and 36 plants per square foot. That will differ between classes. It'll also even differ between varieties, but I'm going to say between 30 and 36 plants per square foot. An example of that, Candace, and people will argue this once again, but I've seen research as far as optimal plant stands of harvest wheat being around 30 plants per square foot, whereas CDC goes up as high as 36 plants per square foot. So I would encourage people, try different seeding rates, try different plant stands on your farm in your area, and you might come up with different results as far as the different varieties you're growing. Plant stand for barley, we're looking for 30 to 34 plants per square foot. Canola, 5 to 7 plants per square foot. Oats, about 30 plants per square foot. Peas, you're looking for 10 plants per square foot, and lentils is between 10 and 12 plants per square foot. So those are, excuse me, those are your optimal plant ranges, and please take that with a bit of grain of salt, because like I said, that will change between varieties or classes, obviously. But I would encourage everyone, I think the whole point of today is not only to open the discussion, but find what works on your farm. I mean, Mike touched on it a little bit. I mean, we spent a lot of time on canola. Some people are still seeding canola at 5 pounds. I work with a grower that is seeding just below 2 pounds per acre. I mean, obviously he's managing his straw very well. He's using a corn planter or disc planter that's very precise. And when we go out there, and obviously we do plant counts in the fall at harvest time, but we go out there after seeding and count emergence as well. And by our calculations, our survivability is between 90 and 95%, which would be grossly ahead of the industry curve. I mean, I think right now as it sits, most people are planning for between 30 and 40% mortality on canola. We plan for 10 to 20. There are other factors that come into play when you make a plan like that. Obviously, we don't have the threshold that other people can wait for to spray flea beetles, for example. So, I mean, there's positives and negatives to everything, but the biggest point of today is know your optimal plant stand, target your optimal plant stand by, excuse me, by calculating that 1,000 kernel weight, and then get out there and check it, because even every seeding implement is going to be different. Get out there in the fall. Now's the time to do it. Get out there and check it. Look find out what it actually is on your farm and make adjustments if need be. If anyone needs to find a calculator or a formula, we should have actually had this on our slideshow here, but if you're looking for a calculator or calculating seeding rate, there's a couple of really good ones. One of them is the Government of Alberta, www.agra.gov.ab/APP19/load seed rate CALC. Obviously, we should have had that on a slide so everyone could see it, but I would say if you're looking for those calculators, just Google it, and you will be able to find these. You will be able to find these formulas and calculators. But the biggest thing, like we talked about, it's harvest time. Get out of the combine, drop a pin, go back and have a look at it, but figure out what the plant stands are on your farm. And that was the goal of today's discussion.
Yes. You know, the biggest thing you have to remember next spring is keep your seed tags so you know what you had for TSW. That's probably the biggest question we'll get this time of year when someone goes to count is, you know, well, what was my TSW? So next seeding, keep all your tags. Your retail will be able to tell you how many bags you bought, and you can do the math and figure out your seeds per square foot, literally, if you have that TSW. So keep that tag. If you want to, you got a large farm, you probably want to keep a little more track of which bags went where so that you can do the calculation a little bit better. But if you have that and you do some counts in the fall, that sets you up to start learning and understanding what you need to do. And I can't tell you how many conversation I've got where customer, grower, retailer pulled up that calculator Roddy's talking about, and then they ask me for what mortality number to put in there. That's not how those calculators were designed. You need to know your mortality. It will be different based on your farm. Something as simple as you seed at 4 mile an hour with the exact same drill and the exact same conditions, and someone else seeds at 5.5, you can see a change. Some years, if it rains, ain't gonna matter. So,
fear is a great motivator, for sure. And people remember their very best crops and their very worst crops, and that haunts them for the rest of their life because they don't want to have that bad experience again. So what I usually will suggest for folks is everybody wants to reduce risk. So, you're in this for the long game on the whole. So you don't have to cross this river in one jump. You can, up your seeding rate or reduce your seeding rate slowly over time so you become comfortable with that. Our seed quality is better than it used to be for sure. The genetics are better than they've ever been. So it's time to start thinking about how am I going to change going forward to meet, my economic return aspirations and still give me that productivity. But do this slowly if you're uncomfortable. Do some tissue testing, monitor your plants. And the last thing I would say is don't do any harm. For a lot of guys that are single shooting, we used to do a lot of harm in the old days when we were at canola, which is a small seed, by pouring fertilizer into that seed row and burning them. Today we have better options, and everybody's fertilizing in one way or another, and I won't get into that, but there are risks by putting fertilizers, and it varies with fertilizers and the amounts with small seed. And I know many guys are now going away from putting almost anything into the seed row, maybe others some foliar or liquids and some micros, and staying away from granulars. And I would just give you one tip because we haven't got time, but if you're going to get damage to roots from fertilizers or anything in the soil, take a look at the root tips. The tips of the roots are not protected very well. So if you're getting any kind of toxicity from whatever you're putting into the seed, it's likely going to show up with the tips burning off, especially with the nitrogen products and perhaps the potassium products, and the tips will brown, and that's where you look for it. If they're nice and green and your root hairs are good, you probably haven't got any kind of damage going on. But look for it, because many plants will have damage, and unless you look at the roots, you won't know it because the plant will struggle. And especially with canola, there is mortality in canola crops all the way from seedlings all the way till the plants are 1 foot and 2 feet tall. So those plants that are set back early look reasonably good. But that's at the end of the day what Curtis has mentioned, and Roddy, what's left at the end of the day is what you want, and you want some good sized plants there.
We used to shut our drills off to see the benefits of fertilizer. Well, we're all sold on the benefits of fertilizer. I think we all understand that. I would challenge everybody to play with the switches on your drills, mark those spots, and go back and do your plant counts in those areas. It's a great way to see if you're getting seed safety issues with your fertilizer with the seed. And in some cases, even some of the side banded stuff for those of you that are really pushing the limits and you're not getting a lot of separation. So, Roddy, before we end this, is there anything you'd like to add?
No, I think, we never got much of a chance to dig into the fertilizer and the seed safety conversation as far as mortality, salt index, that sort of thing. And I know that's probably one of the questions I get asked the most about is salt index and damage to plant or damage to fertilizer. But I would just say you can see on the bottom of the screen there our website. We like to disagree with each other. We like to argue. We like to do these podcasts. I mean, if you have a difference of opinion, I'd say go to our website, find who your Taurus rep is, and give them a call. We love having these conversations, and I mean, if you do have a difference of opinion, we'd like to hear from you. I mean, that's I think going forward with some of these podcasts, I think we got to bring in some people that maybe disagree with us a little more, so we can get some maybe some controversial conversations on the go.
I was at a shop yesterday, and you know, we did not agree on everything. But at the end of the day, the conversation was very positive. Everybody in the room, including myself, is, you know, I'm thinking about things just a little bit different. And, you know, sometimes we hear the words logistics trumps agronomy. Well, it's September right now. We have time to change some of those logistical hurdles and adapt and move forward. This grower, when I left, is seriously considering looking at a different tank. You know, yes, there's a cost there, but maybe there's a benefit. And those are things that once the wheels turn, and so look at everything. That's what I love about that. You know, find that on the website, find that factors affecting yield. Don't assume that nothing is on the table. Continually challenge Mike's comment about baby steps. You know, start somewhere. You know, whether you're a young farmer or you're nearing the end of your career, it's a long haul either way, either for you or for your family members behind you. So we love chatting. I wish this could go on for longer, but everybody's got work to do. So thank you for your time. Thanks for sticking around. If you want to rewatch this, you can feel free. We will be rerunning it. So also, there's a lot of the information on the Taurus website. I think a lot of it is like this, where it's just a conversation. So feel free to check some of that out too. All right. Thank you.
Thanks,
Have
Curtis.
a great day and a great week.
Mike.
Guys, good well.